Are we raising wimps? Is our school system training kids to be wimps? For example, one of our business partners in one of our real estate deals, his child was out there playing, and then he found out that every kid got a trophy. And this guy is Mr. Competitive. You look up in the dictionary competitor, his picture is in there. He is the most competitive SOB I know. And when he found out every kid got a trophy, he took the kid off the team and put the child's little league team, and he put him in the most competitive team possible. He says, I don't want my child developing this idea that everybody should win. He says, it violates everything in my body. So today's program is about how far has this gone now? How many generations is it? We're going to have different people from different, disciplines and professions speaking to this subject. For example, my friend Donald Trump was up there. I know people love him and hate him. But he stands up there and he says, today we're so politically correct, everybody's afraid to say anything. And that's even true for myself and my own company. Kim and I own the company, but our president and CEO say to us, watch what you say because, you can't say that. You can't say this. And I'm going, what? So today in schools, they have to have safe zones and all this stuff that you can't say something to hurt their feelings. And many school teachers are going along with it. So that's what this program is about, is are we raising wimps? And this is the worst part of it, is that this morning I was watching on Morning Joe, and he had this expert from Harvard again speaking on the same subject. And he says when they interviewed the millennials, they all want boots on the ground. In other words, they want us to send troops into the Middle East. 60% want us to send troops into the Middle East. 80% won't go. I'm going, what? Are you kidding me? You want everybody else to go. So that just reminds me, during my time of the Vietnam era, that I remember there was a guy named John Kennedy, but he asked, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So my mom and dad joined the Peace Corps because that was during the time of big terrorism. It was a battle between the USSR and Russia. It was nuclear winter, and they were going to annihilate us. In the 60s, we were building fallout shelters. We knew it was the end of humanity, so it was nuclear terrorism. And then we had the Vietnam War, so I volunteered to become a U.S. Marine and go and fight in Vietnam, and I come back and I get spit at. So this issue of are you a wimp or not a wimp, are we raising wimps and all this stuff, it's been going on for a long time, but I think today it's at a head. And if we're going to fight terrorism, who are we going to fight them with? A pack of wimps? Any comments, Kim?
Yeah, this is a very topical subject. I like the Atlantic magazines called it the coddling of the American mind because it sounds to me like we are so not preparing our kids for the real world. We're preparing them to be taken care of, to be entitled. And the question is what's happening with the millennial generation? What's happening on our college campuses today? And we've got a lot of experts, and I'd like to start with our first expert, Professor Eugene Volokh of the UCLA Law School. He teaches free speech law, tort law, and religious freedom law. He is a practicing attorney. And welcome to our show, Eugene. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. You're an academic also as well as an attorney, and you teach free speech. Before we go any further, just give us your big opinion on this thing about coddling kids and being so afraid of being politically incorrect and hurting their feelings.
And all these protests that are happening on the college campuses saying, you're hurting my feelings, da-da-da-da. What's going on?
Yeah, I'm very upset by what's happening at colleges these days, in part because the very term safe space that you often hear. What people mean by that isn't just safe from being beaten up. Well, everybody should be safe from that, or safe from being threatened with violence. They mean safe from ideas that they view as offensive or threatening or insulting to their identities. And that's a very bad attitude to have at colleges, because colleges and universities are all about exploring all ideas.
Yes, that's what I thought college was. You came to open your mind up and explore and learn.
Exactly. And you can't be confident that an idea is wrong, however offensive it might be. You can't be confident that it's wrong unless you can hear the best arguments for why it's right. after you hear the arguments and after you hear the counter-arguments, you and the others around you and the others in your discipline could conclude based on that the idea is wrong. But you can't. But it's only the ability to hear arguments, whether about race or sexual orientation or religion, that allows us to conclude that one side or another side is wrong. That's long been the basics of universities. It's been the basic of science. Universities aren't supposed to be churches. Churches can have articles of faith where we believe something because that's what we think is right, and if you don't like it, you're excommunicated. Actually, a lot of churches are a lot more intellectually open than that, but some aren't, and that's what churches are all about in some respects. But that's not what universities are supposed to be all about.
So, Professor,
universities, you're not supposed to have articles of faith saying, here are these things that are right, and we've concluded they're right, and that's the end of the story, and you can't say the contrary.
Is this also going on in UCLA undergrad, this thing about needing safe space? I mean, do you guys see the same thing?
I've seen it at UCLA. I've seen it in the UC system generally. I've seen it elsewhere at other universities in the country. This having been said, I think there are particular contexts in the university where, in fact, trying to be polite, trying to be nice to each other, trying to create kind of a pleasant environment and a non-threatening environment to learn is actually quite useful. And a classic example of that has to do with just personal politeness in classrooms.
Right.
If I ever, for example, hear, and this I never have, occasionally you hear of this, but I've never seen it in my classroom, for example, students insulting another student or hissing another student for his opinion, I'm going to come down pretty hard on them. I'm going to come down hard on them precisely because in the classroom, it makes a lot of sense to allow all sorts of ideas, but try to express them in ways that are polite and that are friendly, because that's also the way in which enlightenment is more likely to happen. Likewise, there are these stories of professors who berate students who get the wrong answer. I don't think that's productive. I don't think that helps achieve the goal. So, in fact, actually being polite and being calm and being nice to each other is often quite good. And sometimes being non-competitive is quite good, although sometimes being competitive is good.
So, Eugene, are you saying that these kids are coming into the university with fixed opinions, and their opinions in their mind is right, and they're defending their opinion?
Well, that is right, but I should say it's not these kids. This is human nature. It is normal for people to say, hey, here are these things. I deeply believe them. Anybody who disagrees with me must be evil and must be silenced. That is human nature. There's nothing unusual or millennial about it. This is in fact, it's much more human nature than an attitude saying, well, this person is saying something that's really offensive to me, but I should sit down and really think about whether he might be right and what the best arguments are. So I don't think it's the fault of the students in this respect.
Whose fault is it?
Because they're just doing what comes naturally. It's the fault of the universities who are responding badly. They should be saying, look, we understand that you're offended by these ideas. That doesn't cut it, though. You can't just respond to an idea by saying, I'm offended by it. Respond to it by explaining why it's wrong.
Once again, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today we're talking about the question is, are schools raising wimps? That there's a lot of controversy now on campuses with the new millennial generation. And, they're going to have Dr. Everett Piper on after this. We have Professor Eugene Volokh on at UCLA Law School. He teaches free speech, tort law, and religious freedom law. He's also, interestingly, born in Russia, the USSR, so he understands what being afraid to speak out is. And this question is right now, we have so many children or young people who are afraid of having their feelings hurt. What is going on with our generations? So, Professor Volokh, what's the difference between free speech? As a law professor, what is free speech and religious freedom? But what's the difference between that and being politically correct and all this other stuff they talk about?
Well, I've just finished teaching a 4-unit class, so that's basically 50 hours on free speech and religious freedom. It's very hard to summarize quickly.
I know, I understand.
Because in part, it is complicated like life is complicated. Not all speech is protected. There are exceptions, like for threats and for libel. Not all speech is equally protected in all places. If you decide to give a free speech in my classroom while I'm in the middle of lecturing, if need be, I will call the security officers and get you thrown out.
That's good.
Religious freedom in many ways is even more complicated because while there are considerable rights for people to do what they think their religion mandates, those rights obviously have to be limited in many ways, because what happens if you think your religion mandates killing someone who insults the prophet or something along those lines? It's a lot easier to answer how the law plays out in a particular factual situation than it is to give sort of a broad summary of it.
So are the teachers at UCLA, are they caving into this, or is there a battle going on amongst teachers of how to handle this?
Well, I can't speak for professors at UCLA generally. There are too many people with too many views. I do think that in many places administrators aren't doing a good enough job of making clear to students that at a university you should be tolerating other views, and even if you don't tolerate them in an internal sense, you find them intolerable, you find them offensive, you should be responding to them rather than trying to shut them down. University of Chicago came out with a very good statement on the subject, and some other universities have adopted this, but some universities are still struggling with it, and some seem to be coming out on the wrong side. What I'm happy to see, though, is there's been a lot of publicity faulting universities for this and trying to hold them to account, and that's always helpful. There was a line from some senator who said about constituent complaints, "When I feel the heat, I see the light." So yes. I'm glad that universities are feeling the heat, not just from this actual often a minority of students who want to censor things, but also from the public, who are often coming in and saying, look, you have to protect university values and First Amendment values.
Once again, thank you for all of that. We could go on forever and ever and ever. What is free speech and on religious law, yes. And when can you say what you can't say, and being politically correct. It's really quite... It's quite amazing. So anyway, I'll thank you for your time, for your contribution.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thanks for speaking out on this.
Very much my pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.
We appreciate it all.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Once again, our subject has been stirred up by our next guest. He's Dr. Everett Piper. He's a president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. And Kim and I saw him on television. We just said, amen. This guy has the courage to speak out. And you did very well on television, Dr. Everett. Kim, what do you want to say first before we...
Well, I'm applauding Dr. Everett, and he wrote an open letter, and it's called "This is not a daycare, it's a university." And if you can go online and read this, because it really opened my eyes. And I just want to read one short piece from it to give you an idea of what Dr. Piper is saying. He says, "Our culture has actually taught our kids to be this self-absorbed and narcissistic. Anytime their feelings are hurt, they are the victims. Anyone who dares challenges them and thus makes them feel bad about themselves is a, quote, hater, a bigot, an oppressor, and a victimizer." This is what he's saying that is going on with the kids' minds today in the universities. So, Dr. Piper, welcome to the program.
My pleasure to join you. Thank you.
And what spurred you to speak out?
Well, the anecdote behind the story is that as a Christian university, we still have required chapel. And after one of our chapel services, which was on 1 Corinthians 13, the quintessential love chapter, not political, not acerbic, not even sarcastic, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, one of our students came forward afterwards to the speaker and said that he felt singled out and uncomfortable, and he was critical because of those feelings that the speaker had stirred up in him. My response was, that's your conscience. You might want to tend to it. I'm not interested in coddling you and comforting you. I'm interested in challenging your character. And when your conscience speaks to you that you may not be as loving as what 1 Corinthians calls upon you to be, you might want to confess your sins rather than blaming everybody else. So that was the context for my open letter.
And what happened to the student?
Well, and I want to clarify, this really isn't about the kid, and I didn't say who he was, and I'm not going to, but no. I'm really speaking to my culture and the college with a capital C, the academy, if you will, as much as I am to my kids. I've got great kids at Oakwood, and they buy into who we are, and that's what education is about. But The college and university has created this monster. Like I said, we've taught our kids to be this self-absorbed and this narcissistic that they can actually throw the victim card on a sermon on love because it makes them feel uncomfortable. That's where we are in the academy today, and shame on us. We've created this problem. We've created this mess.
And does this go back to grade school, high school, all through the system?
Absolutely. Richard Weaver told us in his seminal publication in 1948, Ideas Have Consequences. That was the title. His point was, ideas have consequences. They matter. What you teach today will bear fruit tomorrow. Good ideas, good fruit. Bad ideas, bad fruit. To quote Barack Obama's pastor, if you will, the chickens will come home to roost. And if you keep perpetuating lousy ideas, narcissistic ideas, self-absorption and selfishness, and victimization rather than virtue, and if you're more interested in playing the victim card rather than pursuing veritas, truth, as part of the academy, then you're going to get a predictable outcome, and it's ugly.
Let me ask,
selfishness.
Do you see this a growing trend or an isolated incident? Because we had Professor Eugene Volokh from UCLA on. He says for them at UCLA it's kind of growing. Do you see the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. Look at the news. You guys cover it. You're in this business. When you see the University of Missouri and when you see what has happened at Yale, where two professors who did nothing, and these are not right-wingers. These are Yale tenured professors. When you have two professors that merely said students have the right to wear whatever Halloween costumes they want, and the students rise up and say, well, wait a second, some of those costumes may offend others. They demanded the resignation of these professors, and after over a month of hearing these students scream at them and F-bomb them in the public square of Yale, the professors finally resigned. What kind of academic freedom is that? What kind of intellectual latitude and freedom is that? It's fascism. It's ideological fascism. It's not freedom.
And what's causing the universities to give in, to surrender?
Well, again, they've created the monster, and they don't know what to do because they've embraced some of this pablum and nonsense. In other words, the administrators and faculty, by and large, have taught themselves and their culture this lie. It doesn't matter what you believe as long as it works for you. Postmodernity. Well, it does matter what you believe and what you teach. What worked for Pol Pot didn't necessarily end well for others, but he believed it. It mattered what Hitler believed. It didn't end well for others. It mattered what Mussolini believed. It didn't work well for others. Bad ideas need to be confronted, and this postmodern nihilism, this intellectual nihilism, this moral nihilism will bear nothing but a mutiny, if you will. It'll bear anarchy because, as G.K. Chesterton told us, when you get rid of the big laws of God, you don't get liberty. You get thousands of little laws that rush in to fill the vacuum.
Amen, amen, amen. What do you think the long-term effect on the lives of this millennial or a generation that actually believes they need to be protected from ideas or events that upset them? What do you think the long-term effect on their life might be?
It'll be the dumbing down of humanity, and it'll be the dumbing down of freedom. Because when you start claiming the victim card rather than pursuing the virtue card, you're always going to be self-focused and selfish rather than outward-focused and selfless. Victimization says, you owe me, I want my pound of flesh. Virtue says, I owe you, how can I love you and serve you? When victimization becomes the objective of the academy, you're going to get this inward narcissism, and you're going to get this balkanization, and you're going to get fascism, where we all separate into our groups of power, and as soon as we've got the podium and we've got the pulpit and we've got the gavel, if you will, we will oppress all others until power shifts. It all starts to reside in power rather than the principles of veritas and truth.
So, Dr. Piper, so what's the solution to this?
The solution is to go back to the Liberal Arts Academy and the church upon which it was founded. Let's go back 1,000 years. Why was a liberal arts university founded in Oxford and Cambridge? To pursue truth. It was to educate a free man and a free woman, to liberate you and to liberate me and to give you liberty and freedom and justice. That's what a liberal arts education was all about, because it recognized that liberty had to be grounded in veritas, truth. There's a reason that Oxford's shield to this day has one word on it, veritas, truth.
So also at Oklahoma Wesleyan, don't you guys welcome opposing ideas and new ideas?
You said you had 965,000 views on your website, and you had a few that some were opposing your point of view.
And isn't that the point? You can have a robust and open exchange of ideas, and if I get 2% of 965,000 that don't like what I've just said to you, which arguably that's probably true. I mean, an overwhelming majority of this nearly million people are saying, go get them, this is a good idea, this is good for you to challenge our culture to think about these ideas. But if you get 2%, 5% of a million, that's enough folks that can make some noise. So how do we handle that? That's the beauty of truth. You can play basketball because there are boundaries and there's an official. You can play in an orchestra because you understand the rhyme and rhythm and cadence, the rules of music, if you will. You can't run a race without boundaries and rules, and you can't play an instrument unless you honor the rules of music. You have freedom. The paradox of discipline and freedom comes into play when you recognize that there's something more powerful than you and me to blow the whistle on the game or the debate. And what is that something? It's truth. Truth is the judge of the debate, not you and not me. As C.S. Lewis says, you can do no measuring rod unless you have a measuring rod outside of those things being measured. And that's the beauty of a Christian liberal arts institution that recognizes the power of truth to judge the debate.
Once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today we have three very special guests. And the second guest is Dr. Everett Piper. He raised a firestorm when he published this. It's a university. This is not a daycare. And it's about, young students today saying, you hurt my feelings. I disagree with you. I want a safe zone and all that. And we're wondering today, Doctor, is this, question is, are we raising wimps, where they have to be protected from all things outside of them, but also how much are the parents, part of the problem as well as the solution?
Well, we know our parenting is very important as we raise our children, and this isn't just an 18-year-old problem at the college level. It's a 48-year-old problem because regardless of your age, I would argue you've come out of this swamp, if you will, of postmodernity, and therefore you have the muck and the water on you, and therefore you're going to bring some of these ideas to the table where you don't want to be challenged. My point is, we call it cognitive dissonance in human development theory, that this dissonance, this discomfort that comes when you have a conflict in your soul, your mind, and your heart, that's actually good because that discomfort and that tension can be used for growth. But if all you do is give somebody a participation trophy, if you will, when they feel that discomfort, they're not going to grow. They'll be coddled, and they therefore will stagnate in immaturity rather than grow toward a higher intellectual, spiritual level of being an adult and a human being that engages culture robustly and for the good of other people and themselves rather than just saying, here's the interesting thing. Love says, I care a great deal. I'm going to stand in your way and say no. Enablement says, I could care less. Go do what you want. Love says, stop. Here's the way to heaven. Enablement says, I don't care. You can go to hell. There's a huge difference between love and enablement. Love uses the dissonance to challenge other people toward Christ. Enablement says, I could care less. Go do what you want. And if it hurts you and hurts others, it's fine with me.
Well, most importantly, Dr. Everett Piper, I applaud you for having the courage to speak out on this very, very, I would say it's a crucial subject because it affects the next 50 to 100 years of our country. But the other reason is you have a pack of wimps in your family. You may want to have them listen to this program again. Because let me tell you something, the real world is not really made for wimps. I was just watching MSNBC this morning, and most of these post-millennial kids in college, they all Harvard research, they found out that they all want to put boots on the ground, send those people in to kill ISIS. 60% want them to kill them. But 80% said they wouldn't go. And that really kind of touches my guts a bit because I went to Vietnam twice. I'm old school. I also went to military school. And being a Marine, if my feelings got hurt, if my feelings were not being hurt, there was something wrong. I mean, the way they toughen you up is to physically challenge you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and insult you. And so when I came back from Vietnam in 1973, I said, I fought for the wrong people. You know, I come to downtown Honolulu, and everybody's a pack of wimps. You know, they're screwing everybody, stabbing each other in the back, but everybody's getting politically correct. And I think now it's come to a head. We just had Dr. Eugene Piper. He says this is not a daycare, it's a university. So he's speaking out finally about the pack of wimps our schools are raising. Any comments, Kim?
Well, I think it was really interesting because our two previous guests, Dr. Eugene Volokh of UCLA School of Law and Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan, they're both saying the same thing, that the fault lies with the school and university
and
system.
The parents.
And they talk about the parents, but they really did say that the school system is to blame for this because we're coddling kids and we're giving everybody a trophy and we're not teaching what needs to be taught and we're not standing up, and they're laying back and surrendering to all of these protests, and university professors are resigning. It's quite amazing what's going on the campuses today. And we have one more expert today, Jason Dorsey.
And Jason is the guy that caused this entire problem.
Because he is part of the millennial, and he is the Gen Y guy. He's an expert on millennial research. He actually is the founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics that researches the whole millennial generation, and other generations.
So we saved the best for last because
Yes.
Jason's irreverent. And he sees both sides, and he makes a lot of money, trying to explain to corporations, how do you market to wimps, right?
Welcome, Jason.
Is that what you do, Jason? So
I'm glad to be here representing all wimps.
So you're the founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics. You're just on TED Talks X.
Yeah, you have a TED Talk, TED Talk.
And you're always a valued guest because you're irreverent and you speak, to both sides of it. Because you say some guys are moving on, some generations are moving on, but other guys are falling behind, same generation. And you also talk about it's not the Y generation, not millennial, but there's another generation, sneaking up behind the millennials. So welcome to the program, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And,
So-
you're exactly right. Oh, sorry, Kim.
No, I was just going to say, so what the heck's going on with your generation?
Well, I think a lot of millennials are in trouble, to be candid. As a millennial and as a researcher, what we consistently see is that a lot of millennials haven't developed, as Robert would call, potentially the resilience to be able to make it in the real world, and they're frustrated by it. Employers are frustrated by it. You guys are frustrated by it, and now we're seeing it in colleges. I mean, the fact that we've got the stuff going on in Yale around Halloween, we've got just everywhere this kind of hypersensitivity to being not only politically correct, but even a higher standard than that. And the problem is, this is my take on it, I'm not really worried about the university piece. I think at the end of the day, that's going to sort itself out. What absolutely keeps me up at night is what happens when these people who are so easily offended enter the workforce.
Good
what
question.
happens the first time they've got to deal with a customer who's rude, or they don't get promoted? I mean, what are they going to do? Are they going to protest? They're going to call up their mom?
Or how about dealing with me? You know what I mean? Oh my!
Yeah,
God.
I definitely don't want to be dealing with you, Robert.
I know. So that's why they have a safe zone around me, so I don't talk to anybody.
And this is a real issue, though, because to your point, we as a nation are going to be in trouble if people don't develop a backbone. And that's a big issue because at some point you have to grow up, suck it up, and say, it's on me. When you get a tough assignment at work, you're not going to get some paper in front of it that says, okay, there could be some triggers in here that are going to affect you adversely. Well, you know what? You didn't do a good job. That's the end of the day. Try it again.
Yep. So, Jason, how did this all come about? How did it happen? What?
Generation Wimp. We should just call them as they are. Generation Wimp.
Hey, we're not all wimps, all right? Some of us are making it happen. But where it did come from, first and foremost, I disagree with the person, this expert that was on earlier that said it's just on the colleges and the universities. It's bigger than that. Almost all of these behaviors start with parenting because that's where you learn. That's where conditioned. Those basic models come from parenting. Now, what happens, though, is we enter the school systems, and then that's where it's either reinforced or it's broken. And what we're seeing is a reinforcement, and that's because it could be parents are scared, school boards are scared, or they're made up of the same parents. Everybody needs a trophy, grade inflation. We're reconfiguring the SAT so we can keep the scores higher. So what happens, though, is it ultimately becomes the norm. And once it becomes normal, that's when it's very, very difficult to break. And again, what scares me is we learn it from parents, becomes reinforced when we get into the schools, And then you get out into society or the workforce, and suddenly that's what's to be expected. And I'll tell you what, employers will not tolerate it. They won't.
Oh, we wouldn't.
No, can you imagine the first one that comes up to Robert and says, Robert, I don't like the fact that you called me a wimp. That has hurt my feelings. He's going to be like, well, you think that hurts?
That would be entertaining, actually. So all your research you're doing, Jason, is what needs to happen? How does that get turned around, or does it?
Yeah, well, it does get turned around. Here's what's really interesting. What our research is showing, we just did a national study on the generation after millennials. We call this generation iGen. Other people call them maybe Gen Z. There's a few different names floating around.
What would the age group of this be?
Great question. The age group would be about age 20 and under.
Okay.
So the very oldest of them would be in the college or university experience right now. But as we know, millennials are clinging on to college as long as possible.
They are.
There's a lot more of them. But as we look at this generation, what we're seeing, and if this holds true, it's going to be a big deal. What we're seeing is that this generation on the whole is more pragmatic about the real world. And so what that means is we did a study, it's about to come out, and we found that a large percentage of iGen would choose to go to a lower-paying college in order to graduate with less debt if they could get the same degree. We also found that they would take a lower-paying job, or they would start at more of an entry-level position than millennials, for example, would. And this is a big deal, because if a generation comes in and says, look, I'm willing to do the work that the other group doesn't want to do, well, guess what? That's the one that not only gets a job, but they get promoted. And entitled millennials that feel like the world owes them something, all these people that we see quoted constantly, they're going to be leapfrogged. You mark my words on this. They're going to be leapfrogged by the next generation. And they're going to be sandwiched out because boomers aren't leaving. Gen X isn't going anywhere. And now you've got a new generation coming in saying, hey, we'll take whatever job it is. We don't want to turn out like the millennials, which is what they're saying. And so if that holds true, it'll be pretty fascinating to see the future of it. But the bottom line is that iGen is different because their parents are not baby boomers. Their parents are Gen X, or their parents are millennials. You know, my daughter is an iGen, and their whole world is different. You know, my daughter's been using her iPad since she was 1 year old. Right? She got potty trained using an iPad.
There you go.
Oh, that's what I need. That's what I missed in my development. Potty training.
I have a solution for you now.
Hey, once again, it's Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today we're talking to three special guests, and our last guest is the most entertaining, is Jason Dorsey. He's the Generation Y guy. He's an expert on millennial research and now iGen, and he's a founder for Center for Generational Kinetics. And we're talking about, are we raising a pack of wimps? Should the next generation be called wimp generation? You know, and that's because of the people say, oh, you hurt my feeling. I want safe zones, and I don't want to hear anything I don't want to hear. So Jason is the expert on that. He's just recently on TED Talk, so you may want to go to his website. What is your website, by the way? I don't have it down here.
Yeah, it's jasondorsey.com, DORSEY.com. And the TED Talk is on the generation after millennials. And one of the things we share is, like, iGen, they think the Jetsons, the cartoon, is about the past.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Anyway, the reason Jason's important is if you have one of these wimps or these kids, or you're an employer, and you need to find out how to deal with these prima donnas, Jason Dorsey is your guy, and he's always entertaining. How about to parents right now who have kids? What would you say to them who haven't yet gone to college?
Yeah, well, the number one question I get is how do we make it so our kids don't end up like this? Or if they're like this, you know, how do we fix it? And I think at the end of the day, parents, this kind of non-wimp psychology, if you want to call it that, has to come from the parents. And they've got to be the ones that put their foot down and say, look, it's on you to make this happen. I'm not going to save you. Your professors aren't going to save you. You can create whatever future it is you want, but you have to own it. And that message is not happening. And everybody likes to blame everybody else, but at the end of the day, if you're the one enabling these behaviors, whether they're 24 or 33, the buck has to stop with you. I mean, I was just talking with a guy. He spent over $300,000 taking care of his millennial daughter who doesn't have a job, has 2 kids, and she literally threatened him and said, you need to take care of me or I will report you for not taking care of me.
Oh, my goodness. That's twisted. That's twisted.
It's totally twisted, but the reality is these are all learned behaviors, and if they're going to stop, they've got to stop with us. And as long as we say it's acceptable and as long as we keep apologizing, there's no reason for these behaviors to stop. In fact, they're going to continue and they're going to get stronger.
I have another friend with the same age group, 35 years old, living at home, has a job, makes a lot of money, but doesn't want to leave home. And what I said to him, I said, why don't you kick the kid out? He says, oh, I couldn't do that. I mean, what kind of mentality is that?
Well, it's the philosophy. I wrote about it in my book. It was called My Reality Check Bounced. And it was this philosophy that we want it to be easier for our kids than it was for us. And it's pervasive, and a whole generation experienced that. And the problem is that, in particular, baby boomer parents were very effective. Really made it clear that we want it to be easier for you. And that's come back to haunt them, and many of them are frustrated, and most of them, if you talk to them one-on-one, will admit they know where it came from, but now they don't know what to do. And, you've got a good job, you're living at home. You could make the argument, well, they're investing all the money they're saving, they're doing this, they're doing that. Well, you know what? When I go and interview them, very rarely does that happen. They're taking all that extra money and spending it on something else.
Yeah, because it's really interesting. I mean, here at the Rich Dad Company, we talk about, it's the adversity, it's the setbacks that make you stronger, that create your growth, that make your businesses better. And it sounds like in the millennial generation, they just want to be comfortable. They don't want to face any adversity, so they get out in the real world, and they're so not prepared when any kind of setback, even a minuscule setback occurs, they just don't know how to handle it.
You're exactly right, because, again, that's a learned behavior. I mean, for me, the most formative time was when I dropped out of college, my parents cut me off. And I slept on a floor of a garage, and it sucked. It was terrible. It was the worst 2 years of my life, and it changed my life.
Let's say you're whatever, and you have a 30-year-old kid still living at home. Any advice for them?
Yeah, the number one thing you can do is give them a deadline to leave and show them how you're going to cut them off and stick to it. Good. Because what happens almost always, is they say, you got to leave by such a time, and we're going to stop paying your car insurance or your credit card or whatever it is. Oh, keep the emergency credit card. The problem is parents rarely stick to it. And look, these kids have figured it out. They know the game. In fact, they have lowered their goals to be able to maintain that lifestyle. That's how powerful it is.
Once again, Jason, we'll love having you on the program because you're just so conservative and you don't say what's on your mind. So
don't want to offend anybody with this.
God knows.
That would be terrible.
So keep up the good work. And once again,
your website is JasonDorsey, DORSEY.com, and you have a new TEDx talk. So go listen to that because it's important.
I want to thank Professor Eugene Volokh, UCLA School of Law, teaches free speech. And these kids are saying, you hurt my feelings. She'll sue you and get you fired. But also Dr. Everett Piper, president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University. He's the guy that said this is a daycare, not a university. This is not a daycare, it's a university. And he's speaking out about these wimpy kids, on campus today. And Jason Dorsey, he's Gen Y guy, he's expert on millennial research, and he's talking about the generation behind the millennials. He's the founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics, and he is all about how do you deal with these entitled mentality kids. And it's a serious problem. So this whole thing here, I hate to be the guy, well, in my day, and all this stuff, but my mom and dad didn't pay for my college education. They told me at 16 I was so worthless. They weren't going to they weren't going to pay for my school. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I had to get off my butt. Now they paid for my brothers and sisters, and a different result on that. Kim, you have to pay for your school too.
Yeah,
right?
This was actually funny because when I was in college, my parents were sending me money for college and for housing and all of that. And one day I called them and I said, "Don't send any more money." I said, "I got residency, so my college is almost free. I'm working as I'm going to school, so do not send me any more money." And it was so freeing because I just knew I didn't want to have to be dependent on somebody. So I really made my own way.
But the thing that really spurred this whole thing again was Dr. Everett Piper. When I saw him on television, said, "Hey, amen, this guy is speaking out," because somebody needs to speak out against these wimpy-ass kids and wimpy parents. Somebody's got to say something. We're so politically correct today. As my friend Donald Trump, I don't agree with everything he says, but he's definitely not politically correct, and he just might win the presidential nomination or election for this whole thing. So there's too much political correctness, and even inside the Rich Dad Company, my president and CEO said, calm it down, man, calm it down. And what happened to free speech? Really, that's kind of the question. Are we so sensitive that we can't say anything anymore? So that's why we had this program. And, for those of you who are in business, check out Jason Dorsey, because that's your problem as far as a marketing person goes. Is number one is how do you get people to work, but how do you get them to buy when they expect everything for free? That's really a serious problem. So this is Ask Robert. You can submit your questions to AskRobert@RichDadRadio.com. So, Melissa, what's the first question?
Our first question today comes from Ben in Fort Worth, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert, I'm a small business owner and real estate investor, as well as a big fan of yours. I'm writing because my wife and I are constantly arguing over whether to make our high school son go to college. He has worked with me in my business, and I'm teaching him about investing. He does not want to go to college. He thinks he will learn more by spending that time with me. My wife is insisting he go. How can I convince her to see it my and my son's way?
That's a tough question because, first of all, I'm not a parent. Kim and I are not parents. We like to tell parents what to do. But I think you better find out what's valuable and meaning to your son.
Yes.
And, if your son really does want to be in business and be an entrepreneur, then the way you sort of slide them into going back to school is choose the courses they want. For example, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you've got to have bookkeeping, you've got to have accounting, and you've got to have business law. So they don't have to graduate from the school, but they can select the courses that you recommend to them if they're going to be in business with you. You don't want them to be a dummy.
Well, I would say the word you said, Robert, was meaning, because most kids come out of school, they have no idea what they want to do because school has never asked them, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? So these kids come out and they're lost. And I would say, boy, if your son is interested in something and wants to pursue something and has found something that has meaning to him, let him pursue it.
Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Chrissy in Boise, Idaho. Favorite book, Unfair Advantage. She says, I'm a 40-something business owner, and at the risk of sounding like my grandparents, I don't understand the 20-somethings of today. I post help wanted signs but get very little response, and when I do interview qualified candidates, the first and only thing they want to know is what's in it for them. Shockingly, they also have the audacity to try and dictate the hours they work. Any suggestions on finding and hiring good people in today's environment?
We have a hard time hiring also because that's the first question most people ask is, what's in it for me? It's not what kind of work is it? What will I learn? What will I learn to do? What experience can I gain here? So Jason Dorsey is a person you might want to look into. Again, is the expert on millennial research. So he might have some ideas for you, but I would take a course on that. Another thing I would suggest to all people out there is learn to be an investor pretty quickly. And the reason for that is most of my Kim and our money from the Rich Dad Company goes to pay salaries. We don't make much money with all of our employees. The main reason we're in business is to keep jobs. That is our purpose. But we make most of our money from the I quadrant as investors. We make a lot of money from real estate. But that way we don't have to deal with employees. So anyway, it was part of our long-term strategy to be financially free rather than to be employers. So Kim and I like I said, most of the money from Rich Dad goes to employees and attorneys and accountants and, business services.
Yeah, and managing people, boy, that really is a skill. And neither Robert or I excel in that realm. Our president, Shane Caniglia, does. And
he's great at it.
He's taken the same people that at some point were somewhat dysfunctional and has created an exceptional team. So it is a skill. And one thing that we do here at the Rich Dad Company is a lot of the people here are here because they want to learn how to build a business and they want to learn how to invest. And so we encourage them to start a part-time business. So they're employees, but we're also teaching them skills and how to be an entrepreneur, how to be an investor. So maybe you need to find out, too, what other people want from you as an employer.
Yeah, we have fantastic employees, man. We're just ecstatic about them. I'm happy when the company makes more money so we can pay them more bonuses and all that. But they're also learning to be independent, and that's part of our culture here. We deal with other companies where they have different cultures for their employees. Their employees are terrified. They're afraid of making mistakes and all that. At the Rich Dad Company, we want people to make mistakes. We want people to bring out their creative geniuses.
Yes.
If they're not making mistakes, I get upset because they're doing the same old thing. They're not learning anything. So the reason we're entrepreneurs is because it's a value system for us to train other people to be creative geniuses. And everybody has a genius. But that's why we keep our doors open at the Rich Dad Company. Next question, Melissa. Our
next question comes from Chris in Seattle, Washington. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, Robert and Kim, thanks for your work and teachings. My wife and I played the cash flow game with our kids, ages 11 to 19. We understand the importance of financial education as you teach it. The problem is, what we see, especially with our 19-year-old, is everything in her world is about instant gratification. Example, I have money and I want that designer handbag, so I'm going to get it. Any suggestions?
Well, Kim has the same problem with me.
Imelda.
But, I like instant gratification. It's one of my problems. But the way my rich dad handled it, he was teaching me how to be rich. In other words, he inspired the greed factor in me. In other words, if instead of telling me to save money, which is as boring as hell, or live below my means, and all that stuff, which most financial planners tell you to do, he took me out, he showed me his properties, and he told me the numbers and how he structured the deal and all this stuff. So if you will take your child out and show them how they can acquire property and all this, and all of a sudden they go, oh, my God. Or look at the stock market. You have them invest in stocks and all this. So you create this game where they're actually professional investors rather than savers. You see, saving money and living below your means and getting out of your debt is not exciting. And until you replace that boring game with something more exciting, where they might get rich, where they might lose, where there's some risk in it, then it got exciting for me. So today, I don't really care about my salary. I just want another opportunity to put a deal together. Right, Kim?
Absolutely. That's our game. And I would say to Chris, your daughter's 19, so obviously she's out of high school. What are you doing at home with her? What are you demonstrating to her? Because we just had this whole program on this entitlement mentality of the millennials. And is she got her rent? Does she have a place to live for free and food for free? And is she working? Is that where her money's coming from?
But kids don't respond to that, Kim. That's what I'm saying. Kids want to get rich, and if they're going to spend it on a handbag or not get rich, give them that choice. Treat them like an adult.
That's what I'm saying. Treat them like an adult, because as an adult, you're going to have to make your own way, and you're going to have to pay your own rent. You're going to have to pay your own food.
What I'm saying is that greed is good. And if a child wants to get rich, they may shift their priorities from being a consumer to an investor. And that's what happened for me. I have 2 Ferraris. Do I need 2 Ferraris? No. But because I can invest, Kim lets me have my Ferraris. Now, do I need them? No. How many cars do I have? 9. But all Kim says to me is you go out and invest, you create the cash flow and the income, you can have anything you want. So treat your child like an adult and don't go into this dictatorial stuff about, how much food costs and all that. They have an idea.